Imagine an aircraft so notoriously difficult to fly that its history feels more like a satirical comedy written by frustrated engineers than a military record. A machine designed by a committee that simply could not make its mind up. Powered by an engine that was snatched away at the most critical moment, and forced to find its purpose in a war that was already ending. Today, we are taking an exhaustive look at one of the most unlucky aircraft to ever grace a carrier deck, the Blackburn Firebrand. This isn't just a story about a plane, it's a deep dive into an aviation tragedy where the laws of aesthetics, the Royal Navy's requirements, and common sense were constantly at war. The history of this machine is peculiar. It didn't have a profound wartime impact, nor did it enjoy a long or particularly effective service history. In fact, the inverse is closer to the truth. We are diving deep into this topic today because our Patreon supporters and YouTube members voted for a look at the British strike aircraft, and the Firebrand is the ultimate what-if story. Where does this saga of misfortune begin? It starts in March 1939. The world was on the brink of conflict, and the Air Ministry issued specification N839. They wanted a two-seat naval fighter to replace aging types like the Skua, the Fulmar, and the Sea Gladiator. At this time, the Fleet Air Arm was stuck in an interwar mindset, believing that overwater operations absolutely required a second crew member for navigation and radio coordination. They held on to this belief even as single-engine, single-seat fighters across the globe were proving to be significantly faster and more lethal in combat. But the Air Ministry's vision was as stable as a house of cards in a gale. Soon after, specification N939 arrived. This one suggested that the aircraft should carry 4 forward-firing cannons in the wings, or believe it or not, a 4-gun power-operated turret. This was the era where the British still had a strange, lingering confidence in the turret fighter concept, a concept that had not yet fully collapsed under the weight of reality. However, as soon as the guns started firing in Europe, operational experience showed that turret fighters were sitting ducks. The specification was amended yet again. F540 called for wing cannons only. Then, another change. Specification N8 abandoned the two-seat requirement entirely, opting for a single-seat design. Because the project had morphed so many times in such a short window, the ministry bundled all these changes into a brand new specification, N1140. That is 5 different sets of requirements in a single year. Blackburn's chief designer, G.E. Petty, must have felt like he was chasing a ghost. Despite the bureaucratic chaos, Blackburn's design, the B-37, emerged as the frontrunner. It was competing against Hawker's P-1009, which was essentially just a navalized version of the Typhoon. Blackburn actually had a theoretical advantage here. They were building a purpose-built carrier fighter from scratch, rather than trying to cram a land-based aircraft into the cramped, salt-sprayed life of a ship-borne plane. The heart of the B-37 was its engine, the Napier Sabre III. This was a monster of a power plant, a 36.7 liters, 24-cylinder, liquid-cooled H-type engine. It was rated at over 2,300 horsepower. On paper, this gave the Firebrand performance levels that were light years ahead of anything else in the Fleet Air Arm's inventory. It put this naval plane in the same power category as the high-performance RAF interceptors. The resulting airframe was massive. It was a low-wing monoplane with a wingspan of 50 feet in its prototype form, eventually stretching to over 51 feet for production models. The design was robust. It featured a strong 2-spar center section to house the heavy retractable undercarriage and massive Fowler flaps to try and drag the landing speed down to something manageable for a carrier deck. To keep it sleek, The radiators and oil cooler were tucked into the wing roots to minimize drag. The fuselage was built in two distinct sections. Forward of the wing, it featured a circular cross-section, while the rear was an oval semi-monologue design. The tail arrangement was reminiscent of the earlier Sock, with the fin and rudder set well forward of the tailplane to ensure the airflow remained as clean as possible. The planned armament was heavy. 4 20mm Hispano cannons mounted in the outer wing panels. With an all-up weight of approximately 13,600 pounds, the Firebrand was projected to reach a top speed of 353 miles per hour, with a service ceiling exceeding 32,000 feet. The first prototype took to the skies on the 27th of February, 1942. It was then passed to the Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment at Boscombe Down for further evaluations. The test pilots confirmed that the wing and flap system did indeed provide the lift needed for carrier work. But there was a catch, several catches actually. The directional control during the final approach was described as poor, and the visibility from the cockpit was heavily criticized. Because of that massive Sabre engine, the nose was so long that a pilot trying to land on a deck basically had to guess where the ship was. Development continued with small, incremental changes to improve handling, and they even added racks for 2 500-pound bombs. But while the plane wasn't fundamentally broken yet, it wasn't standing out. It was just adequate, and in the middle of a world war, adequate usually isn't enough when better options like the Corsair or Seafire are available. If you are finding this breakdown of British engineering history fascinating, don't forget to subscribe for more World War real stories. We dive into the archives to bring you the truth behind the most complex machines of the 20th century. In early 1943, the Firebrand's fate was snatched out of Blackburn's hands. The Napier Sabre engines, which the entire plane had been built around, were in desperately short supply. The Ministry of Aircraft Production decided that every single Sabre engine coming off the line had to go to the Hawker Typhoon, which was now a priority interceptor and ground attack aircraft for the RAF. Suddenly, Blackburn had a high-performance fighter airframe and 0 engines to put in it. To make matters worse, the Navy no longer needed a new fighter. The Supermarine Seafire was already in service, and American naval fighters like the Hellcat were pouring in via Lend-Lease. The Firebrand had lost its engine and its reason to exist. But the ministry didn't want to waste the expensive development work. They looked at the Firebrand's massive size and structural strength and had a new idea. Let's turn it into a Carrier-Borne torpedo fighter. Adapting the airframe for an 18-inch aerial torpedo was no small feat. They had to widen the entire center section of the plane by more than a foot to fit the torpedo between the landing gear. This shifted the center of gravity and changed the internal structure. The new strike variant, the TF Mark II, made its maiden flight on the 31st of March, 1943. By October 1943, the lack of Sabre engines forced another radical redesign. Specification S8/43 authorized a version built around the Bristol Centaurus 7. This was a 53.6-liter, twin-row, 18-cylinder radial engine producing approximately 2,400 horsepower. Fitting a massive radial engine where a sleek H-type engine used to be was an engineering nightmare. The resulting aircraft, the TF Mark III, first flew in December 1943. While it seemed like the Firebrand had finally found a permanent engine, the flight tests were a disaster. The Centaurus produced so much torque that during takeoff with full flaps, the aircraft would violently veer to one side. There was a very real chance of the plane spearing off the carrier deck or crashing into the ship's tower. Forward visibility remained abysmal. The tail hook was too weak, and the plane had a habit of dropping a wing during stalls. It was, quite literally, a widowmaker waiting to happen. Unsurprisingly, when the first Firebrands were delivered in November 1944, they weren't allowed anywhere near the front lines. Instead, they were used for trials to see if they could actually be fixed. This led to the TF Mark V, which aimed to make the plane less lethal. They added a massive offset vertical fin so large that people joked it had its own postcode and a clear teardrop canopy to help the pilot actually see where they were going. The strike capability was expanded to carry the Torpedo, two 2,000-pound bombs, or up to 16 3-inch rockets. Production of the Mark V totaled just over 100 aircraft. The first one flew in May 1945, but only 15 reached operational squadrons by the 1st of September 1945, just as the war was ending. After the war, the Firebrand saw limited service on carriers like HMS Illustrious and HMS Eagle. It finally did the job it was redesigned for, but it was living in a world that was rapidly moving toward jet engines. By 1953, the Firebrand was finally withdrawn from service, replaced by the Westland Wyvern. In my view, the Firebrand gets more criticism than it probably deserves. It was an aircraft that never had a fair shake. It was chased by shifting requirements, its engine was stolen, and its mission was changed halfway through. Sadly, because it was never famous or particularly loved, not a single Blackburn Firebrand survives today. Thank you all for sticking with me through this journey into aviation misfortune. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members who make these deep dives possible. A special shout-out to our Wing Commander tier, and a warm welcome to our newest member, Deso 5677. As I'm taking a break over the Christmas period, this is a pre-recorded end screen, but I'll be back with fresh updates in January. Thank you for being part of this community for the last 4 years. Catch you in the next one. Goodbye.